From Southern California, this is The Circle of Insight, a show about everything in psychology. Hear the latest in news and views on psychology. Our motto is simple: wherever there is psychology involved, we are there. And now, here's your host of The Circle of Insight, Carlos Vazquez.
From wherever you are around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us on our special edition of The Circle of Insight, Kelly's Causes. That's right, we're here with former Nip Tuck star and movie actress Kelly Carlson. Welcome to The Circle.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Today we're going to be exploring the world of stalking. That's right, we're going to be exploring with Dr. Eric Hickey. He is the Dean at California School of Forensic Studies at Alliant University. He's also written the book Serial Murderers and Their Victims. Definitely a must-get. Let's welcome to The Circle Dr. Eric Hickey. Welcome to The Circle, Dr. Hickey.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. Thank you.
This is round 2 for Dr. Hickey on The Circle, but today it's a special edition with Kelly. She has a passion for bringing awareness to people and giving them information so they can protect themselves from situations they may not know about. And today we're going to be exploring the world of stalking. So let's find out, what is stalking?
You know, stalking is fairly complex. There are different types of stalkers, and we're always anxious to create these typologies of the stalkers, but there's basically, you can categorize them as stranger and domestic. People to you and people who you do know are coming after you. And there are subcategories of, you know, and we're really concerned about the distance of these people. Most stalking generally doesn't end in violence, but psychological violence, usually there's a lot of psychological violence and really can traumatize the victim.
What do you mean by a psychological violence?
That the terror of knowing that someone might do you harm is following you. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're following you even on email. Given that we have so many ways to follow people today through technology, it's not just about someone hiding behind trees. Mm-hmm. I've been a victim of stalking probably half a dozen times now, and being a male and I'm being very aware of this type of thing. Even myself, I have to be a little bit cautious about these kinds of people because, you know, they have certain ways of acting out and doing things that are kind of offsetting and can be quite disturbing to the average person out there who has someone coming after them, whether they're strangers or not. It is very upsetting to know that someone's hiding behind trees, or they're sending you gifts in the mail, or they're knocking your door late at night. Mm-hmm. So there are a number of things people have to be aware of when they look at this. And I always tell people up front, if you are uncomfortable with somebody and you feel like you're being stalked, you need to document it right off the bat. You need to make sure everything is documented well from the day one, or at least go back in your mind and put it right, because you may end up in court. Right. And if you do end up in court, you need to have this documentation. Another thing that I recommend, if you know who the stalker is, or if you don't, you should file a police report. You should certainly and in some cases, of course, in domestic stalking, you would get a restraining order. Now, I always tell people, of course, a restraining order does not stop a bullet. But what it does, it is part of the documentation process. Right. Restraining order, it's helpful down the road, but you also have to understand that once you file a restraining order, the level of dangerousness increases for about a good 6 months. Yeah. So you'll have to be aware that there are risks you take when you file a restraining order. But I'm getting ahead of myself because, as I said, there are many different types, and you have to know which ones are the most dangerous and which ones are some people are just nuisance. Like in domestic situations, you get people who are just nuisances. They get on email, they'll contact you, they'll harass you a little bit. And that's one of the elements of stalking is harassment. They'll harass you a little bit, and if you tell them to go away, they often do. Sometimes a little visit, something to make them go away. They're not trying to physically harm you, but there's still that emotional harm that they're doing. They don't realize a lot of people, and again, most stalkers are male. There are certainly female stalkers too, but there's a lot more men doing it than women, where there's harm involved, psychological harm. And that person can have nightmares and have all kinds of relational problems, inability to work, fear of going outside. There's all kinds of problems that can develop from someone who is a true victim of stalking. So back to that nuisance stalker, certainly those are fairly common. People get on the internet and they do it, and they use technologies, different ways to follow people and so on. But then, of course, there are the people who are angry and because their ex-wives, their ex-girlfriends left them, and 40% of all femicides in this country are as a result of women trying to leave those men.
Wow. 40%.
So, because there are some men who cannot handle the rejection or the abandonment, and it is a wound that can never be fixed. Because the truth is, when it comes to some men, we're not all damaged that way, but some men, they have these issues with intimacy. They don't understand intimacy. They fear it, deeply fear it. They deeply want it, but they don't know how to get it, and they can't talk about it. So what they do is they become alcoholics, they become workaholics, they have affairs, they self-medicate, but they'll never tell you really what bothers them the most. That's the fear of being abandoned or not having a relationship and trying to find one. And that really is the crux of it, because stalking is all about relationships.
Yep.
The core of stalking is about control.
Sure.
And the control gives them power. And people say, well, this is not fair. I'm being stalked. And well, of course not fair. This is about survival. You have to realize that stalking just changes the rules. The rules go away. We have to kind of come up with a way of managing this kind of situation. I will say that most stalking can be resolved, and it can be resolved if it's done in an organized approach. And sometimes law enforcement has to be involved. Sometimes it can be handled. There are people who do threat assessments and can give you advice how to handle it, how to document it, and so on. And again, most of it goes away. But there are cases where it ends up in death. And so we always have to do the analysis first to see really what's going on here. So I mentioned that there was a nuisance stalker, there was a power anger stalker, right? And then there are people who are just simply obsessed. It's a domestic situation, but they're obsessed with somebody. They can seem like normal people, yet they have this obsession about somebody, and they will come after them, and not necessarily to harm them, but they think they're in love with somebody, or they think that person's in love with them, and that can be very disturbing to the victim. So again, these are all in the areas of domestic, of course. Then you have the whole group of stranger stalkers, where you get people who are mentally ill, you get sexual predators and so on. And again, that's another group. But I don't want to get too far off the track.
Yeah. Actually, Kelly has a slew of questions for you. I think she's going to pepper you here.
Yeah.
Are you ready, Dr. Hickey?
Drink your water. Hydrate.
Drink your water, hydrate.
We're ready. Bring it on.
Okay, all right. So, if someone were to come to you and say, I'm being stalked, right? And they kind of give you their story, how do you diagnose how dangerous this opposition is, the stalker? Like, what are some of do you look at their psychology? What are some of the things you first look at to determine, like how you just said, how would you categorize this stalker to determine the level of danger, possibly?
So we do what's called a threat assessment. And again, I have found over the years that there's not just one set of criteria for this vary, but I want to know, for example, is what I call site or non-site stalking. In other words, is there a physical, or is it done through the mail? Is it done through the internet? And because I need to determine, is this person physically at risk?
Right.
And if they're not physically at risk, then I know that they're psychologically at risk. The other way, it can be physically and psychologically at risk. So we have to determine what action, and that will help us figure out whether we should be taking immediate action to protect them physically, or whether we're talking about how to handle this virtual stalker or this internet stalker. So that's an important piece. Then I want to know what is the nature of the stalking? Is it harassment? Are they sending you gifts? Is it a possessional thing? They want to possess you. They want to own you. Obviously, it's about control. And is it domestic or is it stranger? And that, again, is very important to understand. In a domestic situation, it can be extremely dangerous because this person is angry. He wants revenge, perhaps. He's fearful that you're leaving him, and he doesn't know how to talk about that. And so they can do very desperate things. So again, we want to find out whether it's stranger or domestic, whether there is physical danger or not, and how long this has been going on. Is it relatively new? Is there documentation? Has there been any physical damage? Has there been any contact? Are there any photographs? Is there any written material? What do we have to show for this other than I think someone's following me?
Right.
We'll take into account that about 2% of stalking is false victimization, where someone believes they're being stalked, but they're really not. And I'm very attentive about that because I know that 98% of stalking is valid at different levels. But there are some people who are so needy, and I've dealt with some of these cases. We had a legislator whose wife kept being stalked, and whenever he wasn't home, it's because he wasn't home.
Right.
Once he was home, it all went away. But it's about need, and so sometimes people need to feel important, or they've lost somebody and they try to bring them back, so they create this image. But that's extremely rare. I mean, relatively rare compared to the 98% where you do really see it. I want to make sure that it really is happening.
Sure.
And so we look at that. What kind of proof do we have, and what do we see? And so if there's notes, I'll look at the note and I'll read the notes, and it's to determine, is this person trying to do physical harm? Is there what is the motive that they're trying to give in this contact?
So when it comes to the psychology of a stalker, are there delusions that you find in some cases?
When it comes to stalkers, there are some who are obsessional.
Okay.
And they may have a delusion that this person is in love with. For example, we know that there are some women, and we find more women do this than men, where they believe that that this comedian is in love with them, and some celebrities in love with him, and they're in love with that person, so they start following them.
Like John Hinckley?
Hinckley case, we've seen a number of them over the years. And I'm not talking about Rebecca Schaefer, where she was stalked. She was stalked by a mentally ill person who ended up killing her.
Yeah.
And she made the mistake, unfortunately, she made the terrible mistake of opening the door the first time. And then when he came back for another visit a few minutes later, she opened the door again to a total stranger where he killed her, shot her. But that's a little bit different than someone who believes, like in David Letterman, that David Letterman's in love with me, I'm his wife, and she shows up in his house in his bed, and takes his cars and gets pulled over and says, well, I'm his wife. I mean, there's a delusion there. They can still hold jobs, they can still have other lives, but in fact, the one who was stalking David Letterman finally said at the end of it, she called her friend, she says, I just can't do this anymore. I know this is just not working, it's not right. And she went over and committed suicide in front of a train. But that doesn't usually end that way.
Right.
What happens is you get people who are just so delusional, so obsessed about this individual that they delude themselves into thinking that this is a consensual relationship.
Right.
But that's not. It's more common to see men who have been rejected or abandoned who come after their ex-girlfriend, ex-wives, and you can see it coming. Sometimes you can see it in the relationship before actually stalking begins. Pardon me. We call this pardon me, a death ritual. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, death ritual.
No.
But let's say in a relationship you get into an argument with your girlfriend or your spouse, and there's words and so forth, and you tend to work those things out and you fix the problems and you move on. But in a relationship that's dysfunctional, where the man is trying to control the woman, or vice versa, but usually the man, he might fear that she's trying to leave him, and he senses that. So eventually, maybe there's an argument, he pushes her, maybe there's some physical. Then eventually there might be a knife or a gun in the room just during the fight. And he does that either subconsciously or consciously. And then maybe in another argument, he's holding the gun. And maybe at another point, he points the gun into her mouth. Each time, he gets closer and closer to killing her. The point of that is that he has to convince her he's serious.
Right.
And so each time he does this, he gets closer to that point of pulling the trigger. So I had a case where the victim was going to leave her husband, and they'd gone through this death ritual. And so he took, on the next to the last step, he took her up into the mountains during a snowstorm, took all of her clothes off and put her out in the snowstorm and left her there. And he came back about 20 minutes later when she was turning blue and picked her up and said, if you ever try to leave me again, this is your final resting place. So he gave her no more wiggle room. So she knew that next time she would die. It doesn't matter what her friends think or don't think. She knows. And so when a man's getting out of prison for domestic violence and the ex-wife knows he's getting out and she's not notified, okay, she knows when he gets out, he's going to come after her and probably kill her. But she's the only one that really understands that. And this is where judges and law enforcement, they don't get that part. It's where they carry guns. They're judges. They're men. They don't realize the fear that these women feel. They know what's going to happen. We had a case in Indiana where that happened. The guy was in there for domestic violence. He had nearly killed her before. But he was such a nice guy in prison. He was such a nice man. So they let him go on a home visit without telling his ex-wife. And when he got, he went right down to where she lived in southern Indiana, went into her trailer, pulled her out in front of the neighbors by her hair, and with the butt of a rifle, beat her to death in front of her children. Had she known he was getting out to visit his mother, she would have fled the state. But they didn't notify her. And so the states are changing those kind of laws now because women deserve the right to know when their batterers are getting out because it can be very, very dangerous. Domestic violence is directly linked to stalking, absolutely directly linked. And it usually begins in advance of the actual stalking itself.
You know what I found also, in my experience, if you go to law enforcement of any kind, let's say, but this particular agent or officer doesn't have firsthand experience or training with some sophisticated technology or maybe the psychology, they can't help you, because they don't even know what you're talking about.
Well, also keep in mind that when it comes to that type of stalking, these are considered by attorneys as garbage cases, because often if it's a domestic, they're just having a lover's quarrel, they'll fix it, and these are messy cases. Now, there are officers who understand that they're at great risk. There are others who it's complicated, and so because they don't feel the fear like you do, they don't always respond as quickly in the way you think they should. So that does happen from time to time. And unfortunately, sometimes, as one woman said, she went to the judge and said, he's stalking me. I think she was in her 20s. He was in his 60s. He's stalking me. He's dangerous. I fear for my life. The judge said, there's just not enough evidence here to warrant a restraining order. And she was dead a week later.
Yeah.
He killed her.
That's really tough because I also found if people have to hire, if they're lucky enough to be able to afford physical security, even people providing security, if they don't believe you, you're in trouble and they can't do their job. So I tell people now, because I know a lot of people in the security world, you don't have to believe your person that's hiring you, but you have to do what they say. In other words, you have to pay attention to what they're telling you, like people are following me or someone's come into my house, but the locks aren't broken. You do have to take their word for it to provide proper security.
You do, and sometimes
Good point.
we look at you and say, well, she's probably not. She probably is sincere, but it's probably not really happening. She's probably overstating it. She wants attention, and so we tend to minimize it. And in reality, it's there, and unfortunately, sometimes it does take a while to figure that out, because sometimes these stories get very elaborate.
Yeah,
and
sure.
The victim stories are quite elaborate, and you think, oh, that could be happening. Yeah, often it is happening, and we have, like with police officers, it's not their position to criticize women for staying in a dysfunctional relationship.
But they always do.
They always do question it, but it's not their place to do so. And I keep telling them when I train them, I say, look, your job is to protect them. It doesn't matter why they stay. Your job is to protect them. They deserve that. That's what they're paying their taxes for. You are there and don't judge them. You don't know. You don't walk in their shoes. Women don't leave for a lot of reasons, and some of it's physical, some of it's psychological, some of it's financial, some of it's because they made a commitment. You just have to protect them and do your job, even though that you have to keep going back over and over again. It will work itself out. But if you don't protect them,
Right.
then you've done your job properly.
Hi, welcome to Adelante. This is Adelante Recovery, and my name is Yvette Kuglin, and I'm part of the staff.
Adelante Recovery Center has helped people in dual diagnosis for 5 years. We accept most PPO insurances and provide luxury accommodations and 24-hour support. To speak with an admissions counselor, call 1-888-242-4450.
A lot of time we don't even know what's wrong with us, and sometimes we need to get away to figure that out. So if you want to go for a little retreat out in Corona Del Mar, which is a confidential location, we're here to help. So we're only a phone call away. Thank you.
I had someone say to me more than once, "Wow, you must be a really great girlfriend." Like,
Mocking the stalking.
are you kidding me?
Yeah. You say, look, there. Again, I know judges who have minimized stalking, and they, because they just don't understand. I did some training for some judges a while back, and it was very clear that they, it's a man's world. It's you got attorneys and you get the law enforcement, and it's not that they're really wonderful people. They just don't get the fear part.
Right.
They don't, unless they have been victimized themselves. You take, for example, the head of the FBI. He's a victim. He was of a home invasion when he was a teenager, and he could have been easily killed. He went through that experience. He understands victimization much better now because he walked that walk. And I'm not encouraging people to become victims, but most of us become victims at some point in our lives, and that gives makes us much more empathetic toward people who've gone through this experience. And once you've lost a loved one, or you've seen someone go through a stalking experience, and you've been stalked, you get it. You finally get it, and you have much more greater appreciation for this type of activity.
It's a dangerous learning curve, I say.
It is, and and unfortunately, we often don't want to believe it's really happening, but it is.
Do you have a question? Mark?
Is it different for celebrities?
Well, it's different that when you're on television, you're seen all the time. You don't know what's on the other side of that. You're on TV doing your show, yet there are men out there that are walking around naked in front of the television, looking at you. And there are sometimes,
Who said
I
that?
mean, it's a graphic thing, but it's true. And some of these men attach themselves to women, like TV anchors, female TV anchors, news anchors. Many of them have been stalked because their pretty faces are on the screen constantly. And some men, not most, don't even cross that line, but there are some men who see this and they become obsessed by this, or they'll try to reach out to these women. And so then when you go down the road to people who are celebrities, you're nobody. I mean, the old expression is, you're nobody in Hollywood unless you've been stalked. In other words, someone takes note of you. And so everybody has their bodyguards.
You're somebody.
And during that era, with O.J. Simpson, and then of course he stalked his ex-wife, and then down the road to other cases where a lot of celebrities have had stalkers. It's not a badge of honor, because you ask any celebrity who's truly been stalked, well, I think it's pretty cool. They are terrified because even if they have bodyguards.
Yeah.
You know that sometimes these people can get past them, and they do sometimes, and it can be very, very unsettling to them. So they are, they're public figures, and their privacy is just gone. I mean, you've done your show Nip and Tuck, and that automatically puts you at risk because there's always some nut job out there who says, "Oh, isn't she pretty? I'm going to go follow her." And they do it in some sometimes very strange ways. So you just have to be more on guard as a celebrity. You have to protect yourself and your privacy. And some people, they don't really care. They don't care who follows them. But most people want their privacy. And if you're a female, you feel a little more at risk because you don't know who might be out there. And men generally are physically more powerful, and so they make you really uncomfortable. Again, most men don't do that type of thing, but there's enough of them out there that it makes you very uncomfortable.
Now, let me ask you a question, and I guess you don't totally have to answer it, but this is, I guess, is a more political question, but how do you feel about women and firearms?
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Oh, really? Okay.
I first of all, I like guns.
Okay, good. All right, we'll get along just fine.
Yeah, no, I very much, as my way. No, I really like guns. I don't own a lot of guns. I don't own guns, but I like guns. I like to fire guns. I think that we have a right to own guns, and I'm all for gun. By the way, I'm all for gun control.
Sure. Oh, yeah, sure.
If you own a gun, you should be in control of it.
Absolutely.
And you be responsible for it. If somebody else uses it and kills people with it, you take responsibility for it. But the government doesn't have a right to take over my guns.
Right.
Oh, we settled that issue a long time ago. So we have the right to bear arms. Now, most people are not very qualified to carry guns. That's the rub.
Yeah.
Even men like me, I don't use a gun on a regular basis. And so, should I be carrying a gun? Probably not, because I'm going to leave it somewhere, or someone's going to pick it up, or I might accidentally discharge, because I'm not that versed in it. Although I can handle my guns okay, but that said, but I still have the right to have it. Now, should a woman be carrying a gun? Look, I talked to one woman a while back, and she was being stalked, and she said, "Well, I carry a gun." She said, "I'm not even licensed to carry it. I just carry it because it's about my life. At the end of the day, I'm going to take care of myself." I don't advocate that women carry guns, but I understand why they do it. Absolutely, and I think that women who want to go to the range and take the courses like men and licensed to carry them, concealed weapon permit, more power to them. I also encourage women, just in general, to carry pepper spray.
Oh, absolutely. That's a great tool.
Yeah, I don't want someone to take a gun away from a man or a woman and use it on them, or for them. We had the case just last week, or 2 weeks ago, where the woman was at the store with a licensed gun in her purse, and the child reached into the purse and ended up shooting her and killing her accidentally. Those accidents do happen, but I still think that if you are in fear of your life, then you need to take charge of that and do it in a legal way where you can protect yourself at least the best you can. If it means you're going to carry a small gun with you to protect yourself, then so be it. After all, it is your life. So you'll never get any pushback on me on women carrying guns any more than men. But I do think that we should try to take courses and be well prepared and know how to use those weapons if we're going to carry one. We should just buy it like we do like a telephone. We just assume we know how to use it.
Right.
It's a dangerous weapon, so we always have to treat it with great respect.
I'm a big advocate for gun safety.
Gun safety,
and practice and tactics, and it's a serious thing.
Yeah, that's all gun control, you see. That's my version of gun control, gun safety.
Education and practice.
Education.
Oh, yes. No, I was just curious.
Not about fewer guns, it's about gun safety.
Right, totally. And it's such an interesting topic because being a woman of experienced stalking in the past, that's kind of the only equalizer if I'm alone. That makes me feel somewhat secure, but what comes with that is tremendous responsibility. Tremendous.
No, I will add to that responsibility. Let's say you're in a parking garage, and you have a gun, you have pepper spray. You're better armed that way in that if a man's approaching you, you don't know what he's going to do. If he's not being menacing, you don't know if he's going to ask directions or what. But you have that pepper spray in your hand. And there's a line in the sand. When he crosses that line, and you say, don't come any closer, and he takes one step, you let him have it with pepper spray.
Yeah.
And after you spray him in the face and in the groin, then you get the gun out and
Exactly.
say, one more step and you're going to go down.
Right.
So we need to get women more emboldened, more trained
Yes.
to do that. And not to be as, sometimes women are just so fearful. Most people don't have, everyone has the capability of killing somebody or shooting somebody, but most people don't have the capacity to do that.
Right.
You know, yeah, I guess I could have even people breaking into your home. I'm not going to shoot this person, even if they're coming down the hallway. I don't know if I could shoot them. In a heartbeat,
Yeah.
I would shoot. But that's me,
Right.
because I'm going to protect my home. You know, they're not familiar with the gun. They don't like the sound of the gun, and they're fearful of missing or hurting someone. You have to become comfortable with that weapon. We don't live in a safe society. No one lives in a safe society.
Right.
We do protect ourselves, but not to the point where we have dozens of guns laying around the house. We need to obviously keep things in moderation, be safe,
Yeah.
live life, and we have children around. Make sure those guns are locked up. Absolutely.
We have about 3 or 4 minutes
Oh, yeah.
left.
Go answer
Oh,
the
we're
question.
just getting started. Yeah.
I know, we're running out of time.
It's not the warm-up, huh? Oh, it's not the warm-up. Okay. All right.
Yeah, I know, right?
I wanted to know, we shared a story with me on one of our other episodes about a stalking event, and I thought it might be kind of nice to end it with that idea to show people how serious it really can be. Remember that story with the lady with the door, that things were being left at her door?
Yes.
Could you tell us that story briefly again?
Yes. I had a case here a few years ago where this woman who was working for the county, a younger woman, well, she was at the time probably in her 20s, late 20s. She started getting these notes on her doorstep, and she thought it was the paper boy. So she started writing notes back to him because he was 12, and like notes. Well, then little gifts started to arrive, small gifts and things, and so then she realized, well, why would he be leaving me gifts? So one morning she gets up and she goes out and meets him and says, well, why are you leaving me these little teddy bears and things? Well, he said, well, ma'am, I'm your paper boy. I'm 12 years old. I don't leave you gifts. So then she realized that there was somebody leaving her gifts and it wasn't the paper boy. So of course that frightened her.
Yeah.
Even though these weren't threatening notes, it frightened her. So she called the police. She told the police about it. Well, the police, you know, they watched the house for a couple of days and nobody showed up, and you know, it goes away. But it didn't go away, and more gifts started coming, more expensive gifts, a nice leather jacket and so on, in her backyard. She moved out for a while. She came back, and you know, the note had stopped coming, and then when she moved back, the note started again. So he'd been watching her for some time. Well, then one day there's a small box on her back doorstep. And she opens it up, and there's a diamond ring in the box with a note that says, "We are now engaged.
Oh,
You will wear this
no.
ring from now on. If I ever see," of course, she's been describing where she works. She works with children. "If you ever take this ring off, I'll be watching you, and I will kill you in front of the children in public." So my question to my students is, would you wear the ring? You know,
It's a good question.
would you wear it? And a lot of students said yes. Some said no. Would you put these little children, these small children, at risk?
Right.
And because he described in detail what she was wearing, where she was with the children. She was a bus driver at the time. So she wore the ring, and for a few months. And then on the anniversary of the first note, a knock comes on her door. She opens the door, and it's a UPS man with a package for her. And so he said, "I've got a package for you. Would you please sign the note? Sign this." So he passes it to her, and she goes to sign it, and there's this note that says anniversary. So she suddenly realizes that he's a stalker. He was in a UPS uniform, but he didn't work for UPS. And as soon as she realized, she tried to close the door, and he pushes his way in and ties her up, puts a gag around her mouth and ties her to the staircase, to the banister. She thought she was going to die. She really thought, this is my life's going to end here. And in the interview, I said, "So what did he look like?" She described him as about 27 years old, very handsome. And after he tied her up, he said, "So where's the ring?" Well, she had just had taken it off, and it was sitting on the table. And she said, "Well, it's over there." So we went and got the ring. Well, he wanted it back. He was probably a cheap stalker. He probably wanted to give it to somebody else. He probably had several other victims just give it. And so then he leans over and he kisses her on the cheek and says, "Now we're going to become friends." He says, "I'm really a nice guy. We're going to get to know each other. I'm coming back for you, I promise, and we're never going to separate for the rest of your life." And then he walks out and leaves her tied up. Now that's very traumatizing for this woman. Her roommate comes home a few hours later and finds her all tied up, and of course she was battered a little bit from the struggle. So the woman moves out and she moves in with her parents, and she hides. A year later, exactly 1 year later, a dozen roses arrives for her from this company, and with a note that says, "I'm still watching you, and I'm coming back for you. I just wanted you to know that."
At her parents' house?
At her parents' house. So this guy was good. Now, her thought was, so when I met with her, she was carrying a gun without a permit. And I said, "I understand why you're carrying the gun." She goes, "Oh yeah, I will kill him. If I see him again, I'll just shoot him." Well, of course, she was a very traumatized woman. I fully understood that. But I did assure her that he was never going to kill her. This was never about killing her, or this was about controlling her. He probably had several victims at one time. He was a serial stalker. He liked the power. He liked the game. If he wanted to kill her, she would have died a long time ago. Yeah. This was not about killing her. This was about controlling her. And so years went by, and I saw her a few years ago, and she'd never married, and she said, "I'll never marry. I'll date men some, but I'll never marry because I don't trust men." Well, this is what's happened to her as a result of this stalking situation. She was a victim, and this man destroyed her psychologically. I mean, he's ruined her ability to have intimate relationships with men.
Yeah.
It's a horrible thing. It's like being a rape victim. It truly is.
Yeah.
The damage is just as severe. It really is.
Dr. Hickey, thank you so much again for being on the show and giving us this great insight on stalking. Thank you, Kelly.
Yeah, thank you both.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us as well. Remember, wherever there's psychology involved, we are there.